Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 144 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Typically on Foreign Policy Focus, I discuss current events in foreign policy and international news. Gonna mix it up a little bit today and talk about kind of the cost of the war on Americans. The state has been very, very sneaky in the way that they have sold the war. It's often thought of as the least important issue, and as those of you who always listen to the show know that I think it's the most important issue, and I think I prove that on a routine basis by showing the millions of people's overseas whose lives are absolutely ruined by the war. However, if you look at the results of the war on the American side as well, it's ruined at least tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives directly, and has diminished all of our lives, by a pretty great deal. So that's what I'm going to talk about on today's show at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, the Libertarian Union on Facebook, and then iTunes and Stitcher. And if you guys could share it and leave me a rating and review, it really helps, get this message out there to people. I think I got cool things to say. So I hope everybody else does too. So I guess the first place and the easiest place to start is with the first victims of the war, and those are the United States soldiers who go overseas and die. If you look at the results from the U.S. war overseas, it's supposed to make us more secure and more free at home, and that's what's sold to our soldiers when they go over there and they put their lives on the line. Our politicians tell them that, hey, we're going to use you in a way to make sure that your wife, that your children, that your parents, that everybody you love and care about is safe from terrorists and safe from people in other countries who wish to do them harm. However, if you could look at what the American military is actually used for, and let's just start with Iraq, because I think it's the best example. In 2003, the United States went into Iraq and killed Saddam Hussein and allowed people, forces, and a political movement allied with Iran and friends with Iran move into power in Iraq. Now, I don't think that personally hurts the freedoms of Americans all that much, but if you look at what's being sold in America, Iran at that time and still now is an enemy of America, and that helped Iran. And so, essentially this leads to Americans dying in wars that they don't even understand and that they're not even fighting on the side of that they think they're fighting on. If you look at Syria, I remember as, I was really getting into the liberty stuff and loving it, I was seeing these pictures of, I believe, Marines saying, I didn't enlist to train Al-Qaeda. And that's absolutely what was going on in Syria. America was supporting the Sunni opposition to Bashar al-Assad. However, that opposition was made up of Al-Qaeda. And I mean, I'm sure there were some of the people that Barack Obama liked to talk about, the lawyers, the dentists, and the accountants that were all taking up arms to overthrow the oppressive Assad regime. However, that wasn't the bulk of the fighting force, and it turns out that, lawyers probably don't make all that great of fighters. However, the hardened fighters from Libya and the Iraq war and from Saudi Arabia, who were hardened fighters who had fought in several brutal urban battles, were coming into Syria, and they were absolutely the best fighting force of the Syrian opposition. The people that American trained were either, maybe those guys in disguise sometimes. Sometimes they were guys who may have been well-intentioned, but when they got on the battlefield, the Al-Qaeda guys said, well, give us your American tow missiles and the rifles they gave you, or we're going to kill you. And they said absolutely, or they sold the rifles to them, or, they said no, and then the Al-Qaeda guys killed them and took their weapons. But either way, what the Americans essentially did was trained and armed Al-Qaeda in Syria. And so what American politicians do to the soldiers of the United States and of America is absolutely sick. Those who die, young men and women, typically in the prime of their life and absolute peak physical health, who really have, a lot of them are, very smart people who have tons of opportunity, especially these special operation guys. They don't pit people. Maybe you think of the dumb infantryman that knew in high school, but there are absolutely brilliant people in the army too who are, going over there and losing their lives when they have so much, to look forward to. But then you have their families and their friends and their wives and their children whose lives are, devastated beyond belief as well. And then for those people, you have to expect that they're going to be very, very angry. And the United States government told them that, they were over there fighting these evil people for your freedoms, and so you could be safe, and those evil people killed them even though all he was trying to do was help. And that's the narrative that most people, end up believing, and it made sense to them, and I, perfectly understand and empathize with them for believing that, but in reality that, that isn't what happened. It wasn't the evil Muslim people killed, your, husband who is just trying to bring them freedom. But, that person killed your husband because he was over there in their country trying to create problems for them. And, that's not to say that the U.S. soldier was necessarily willingly trying to be a guilty war criminal or, even do anything. However, thanks to all the propaganda and what everybody's always told and what all the politicians on both sides of the aisle tell everybody, that's the reason why they died. And so, it's just easy to see, why people, it's so understanding to, however, everybody accepts the narrative that's given to them by the U.S. government because that's supposed to be the authority. That's what everybody is taught. And there's very few people like myself and others who say, I really question that and I don't believe that narrative. And I think that's wrong. Those who do make it back, suffer at a pretty high rate for PTSD, alcoholism, drug addiction. There's high rates of divorce and infidelity, broken homes. If you look at the Iraq war with the burn pits, these people are suffering from higher rates of cancer and other different diseases like that. And so there's a huge toll. This is tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people now who are just American civilians who went overseas, became soldiers, did a job and came home. And now their lives are in absolute ruins. The VA sucks. It can't run right. It's not, if the politicians were honest people, the first thing they would do is fix the VA. They would halt their own paychecks until the VA was fixed, but it's not. I don't know how many times I see a story where, the VA has to send out hundreds of thousands of letters to veterans saying, oh, you might have HIV because they weren't properly washing their dentistry equipment properly. It's well known that the VA had secret wait lists and, veterans on those wait lists died while they were waiting for care. I lived in the state of New Hampshire. They didn't even have VA hospital in the whole state. People who lived around my area, the Seacoast area of the state, had to drive hours to get to a hospital. And if you're, seriously injured, that could be very difficult to do. And I understand that, they could go to a regular hospital if they're serious injuries, like they're in a car accident. If they only have one leg. It's estimated that 22 veterans a day commit suicide, although those are typically low figures. A lot of this is like PTSD, or as Peter Van Buren talks about, moral injury that's causing people to commit suicide. We forget that these people who we send overseas to fight will occasionally encounter children with guns, and then you have to make a choice whether or not to shoot a child. The insurgents and the terrorists in these places absolutely exploit the civilian population, and so people will wear full burqas and walk up to security checkpoints and blow themselves up. And I don't know if this is only women doing this or women and men. But it certainly puts, every soldier on a heightened alert every time a woman just, dressed in her religious wear walks close to them. And so it leads, just a ton of unconditional shootings. Also, the fact that we send these people over there and we tell them to shoot, the people, it leads to dehumanization of the population in their eyes. And there's certainly a lot of war crimes committed by U.S. soldiers. And I'm not saying that every veteran does this or that every soldier does this, but, there's been several reported instances where detainees were, abused and, they peed on them and photographed them naked. Terrible, terrible things. I believe, one of the special operations teams has a trademark where they shoot the top part of somebody's head off after they've killed them. And so, these kind of atrocities happen. And so, then there's people within those units who are then, forced to either decide to keep that quiet or to say something about it. Saying something about it is a very difficult thing to do. How many of us rat out our friends when they do something wrong? And when that wrong thing is a war crime, it's a really difficult thing to deal with. And so, we have all these suicides, we have all this PTSD, drug addiction, drug abuse, and just so much. And just think of how many lives are ruined, because if somebody goes overseas and they have a wife and 3 children and then they come back and now they're addicted to heroin, that doesn't just ruin their life. It ruins their life. It ruins their children's lives. It ruins their wife's life. Their parents are, likely going to have a very difficult time dealing with it. Their friends are going to really struggle to deal with it. And so, it's not just this one person. It's a whole systemic effect that it's going to have. As I was talking about before, we have all this problem and then people want somebody to blame because this is a natural thing we do. And so the politicians, rather than stepping up and saying, well, we put these people in really bad and really difficult positions and, we're really sorry we made a mistake. Turns out the Iraq war was fought for Iran, not for American freedom. Turns out the Taliban were willing to turn over Osama bin Laden and we didn't get into that war either. And we're helping the jihadists in Syria and Yemen and Libya. That's never what they tell them. They say, well, those Muslim people are really dangerous. And man, if there's not, some American every couple hundred miles in the Arab world, then, somewhere, somehow they're going to plot and blow up another American building. And this comes from both the right and the left. And as much as, the more liberal left has now tried to PC it up a little bit and point to all the, white people that kill people in America. At the same time, they say, well, we need to send drones overseas. We gotta bomb Yemen. Don't have to explain it, but there's dangerous people there and we gotta kill them. I think that's the most serious cost of the war. And, if you're only gonna listen to part of the show, I'm glad you listened to this part because I think it's by far the most important. Is that, it's created the culture that, those people are our enemies. And now, so whether it, you think of it as Muslims or Arabs, and it's all confusing because you think everybody from Pakistan to Libya looks like a Saudi, which really isn't the case at all. But, from people from there to there, we have to be everywhere to make sure ISIS doesn't kill us. Of course, we had a lot of loss of freedoms in the United States, and that's kind of what prompted me to do this show today, is that the Senate renewed the Section 702 mass surveillance program. This program sweeps up the communications and data of hundreds of thousands of millions of Americans every single year. Tons of very personal information that you definitely don't want the government to know. This is one of the things I've been really disappointed about with Trump taking power. I would have thought that the one thing that the left would start to get really good on really quickly is, well, we definitely can't let Trump spy on every American because, man, he's gonna use that. And every time he hears, they're gonna flag Mexican in the phone calls. And every time they say Mexican in a phone call, they're gonna go deport those people. I'm being a little hyperbolic and exaggerating there, but, this is what they think that Trump is literally Hitler and he's trying to kick everybody browner than himself out of America. Then he would absolutely exploit this program. But, it just shows the fraudulence, especially of the left-wing politicians who went along and now we have the Section 702 spying program in place. Rand Paul, Ron Wyden, and others were very willing and ready to filibuster this thing. They were gonna kill it. I really thought that they might actually kill this bill. But, unfortunately it got through. It's now on Trump's deck, who was possibly spied on under the 702 program. And it looks like he's gonna renew it. Obviously, props to the heroic Edward Snowden, who is still in exile in Russia, who helped to expose all of this and at least ignite some kind of conversation. It's because of him that, there was even a conversation about it. And of course, this program is 100% justified by the war on terror and the fact that, if we're not constantly spying on you somewhere, somehow, some Muslims are going to get together and blow up a building. This law in particular, unlike, maybe the left-wing critique for, gun laws saying that, it's scary white people that are going to get the guns and kill everyone. In this case, it's foreign surveillance. And if you honestly ask Americans, they're not afraid of some, Frenchmen or some Englishmen plotting to blow up the United States. It's always from the Muslim world. And of course, that's because so many people's lives have been ruined by the war. If you think about what has to be millions of people now connected to the veterans who went overseas, got PTSD, got drug addictions, lost limbs, lost their cognitive ability, or whose own, personal lives were ruined or, not as great because they ended up enlisting and joining, you're now in the millions of people. And so, everybody supports this kind of thing. Same thing with the TSA, we all had to get felt up every time we go, on an airplane because of the TSA, the lines are super long, it's really inconvenient. And, to some extent, I understand people who say, well, I would rather get felt up by a TSA agent every now and then than have to possibly be on an airplane that's going to be blown up. Of course, the only reason that, people are afraid that their airplane is going to get blown up is because they've been told by every politician for the past, 16 years or so that without the TSA, if you got on an airplane that, some Arab's going to blow it up. And I think there's some importance in that, there's some pretty sick stuff that goes on by the TSA as well. They steal a lot. And at sometimes they do intentionally commit sexual assault, and they're serial sexual assaultists. There's people with, serious issues that are going around groping people and working for the TSA, and it's gross. Of course, I think in large part the immigration issue is really an issue, secondary effect from the war on terror and the war on drugs. If you look at Trump's kind of two policy actions, they're to build a wall on the U.S. border with Mexico, and they are to ban people from Muslim countries. And, clarify, not all Muslim countries, there's just a six of them, but general purposes, the idea is to ban Arabs and Mexicans. Now, the reason that people are coming to the United States from South America, from Central America, and from Mexico is because, in some sense, they're looking for a better life just from everyone else, but a lot of these people are refugees from the drug war. Everybody should go check out my episode with Brian Sadie on what the drug war has done to Mexico. There's some real terrible things going on, and while Mexico isn't the country with the second most homicides, like that report said, there are a lot of homicides in Mexico. There are cases of, Mexican cartels wiping out entire villages, hanging people from bridges. They find, heads in coolers. And obviously I'm not saying this to, try and demonize Mexican people in any way and say they don't belong in this country, but to say that because the worst people are empowered whenever you have a black market, the people that end up rising to power and controlling these $1 million cartels are the sickest of the people on the planet Earth. And they're only empowered because, Walgreens can't sell marijuana and only, the local drug man can. Of course, like I said before, the only reason that people are scared of people from Muslim countries coming to the United States is because, more or less according to the U.S. government, we've been at war with them for the past 17 years at least. If politicians were really the most heroic people in the United States, rather than, playing on the hysteria of 9/11 to start wars and to get reelected, they would go to the American people and say, hey, I know this is really complicated, and I know everybody wants a lot of revenge for 9/11, but we have to look at the fact that Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright are war criminals who went on TV and justified the murder of 500,000 Iraqi children. And I know 3,000 Americans just got murdered, but I'm going to tell you the unpleasant truth that this is blowback from the crimes that you ignored. And we could go get Osama bin Laden, but we can't go knock over the government in Kabul in Afghanistan. We can't go overthrow Osama bin Laden. We can't attack Iran. We could get the people that are guilty for this crime, but we also need to know that the only reason this crime was committed is because of previous U.S. crimes. But obviously none of them will say that. I think that's one of the fundamental problems with democracy is that politicians are never incentivized to tell people unpleasant truths. So I hope it's starting to make sense as to why the immigration, that there are people in the United States who are afraid of people from Muslim countries, and as they've been told to be afraid of those people for a long time. And there's a lot of people in this country who know somebody whose either life was ruined by going over there to fight those people or who didn't come back because they went over there to fight those people. And for those people, that danger is very real because they know somebody who died from the terror war. These are lasting and meaningful, implications that these wars have on and for our society. And I think we should really take careful consideration as we pursue those wars. Spending issue. There's a lot of poor people in America. Nobody in America really is Yemen poor, deciding which of your children to feed kind of poor. But there are people in the United States who, more or less live in shanties. They're homeless and their lives are, very not great. And with a little bit more money, they could be quite a bit better. A lot of these people are veterans, whose lives were ruined by the war. And for that reason, there's some people who are homeless and who are poor. And no matter how much money, if you gave them like $5 million, they would be able to make it for a couple of years. But you're just not going to provide them with assistance because they have to be high all the time. And that's the only way they could cope with being alive, or they're going to kill themselves. And, there may be medical options or psychological options, but those things are really hard for a lot of people to pursue, especially when you're, homeless and, maybe it was stigma reasons and stuff like that. Also, the VA is absolutely terrible, and, without hiring a bunch of psychiatrists right now and saying that, hey, we're going to make sure that not only are we, passively waiting for veterans to reach out to us, we're going to go reach out to them because, that's the way you engage people who are suffering with a mental illness. And, PTSD and moral injury are, kind of forms of mental illness. So going back to the spending issue, we're going to spend, I think, like $1.5 trillion on the lifetime of the F-35 program, looking at like $2 trillion right now. And we're just at the start of the nuclear revamping program. $5.56 trillion on the war in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. Just imagine what this money could have been used for. And this doesn't even count the opportunity cost of taking some of the best and brightest Americans, some of the most physically fit and kind of superior specimens, physically from the American standpoint, and sending them overseas to die. And they're for that reason not in the American economy. They're not learning a skill, and the opportunity cost from that is incalculable. So with all that, I think it's pretty obvious that, there's trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth missing from the American economy that have been spent on the war. And, I'm a libertarian. I'm not a big supporter of welfare. And I'm not saying that all this, money should just have been filtered through the welfare system. But at the same time, if you inject all that money of real wealth in the U.S. economy, not in inflationary terms, but the fact that we're taking, so much metal and blood and everything and wasting it overseas, all this could be pumped right back into the American economy. And, for that reason, prices go down and people are able to buy more. It just drives the economy to have all that wealth that you're not absolutely robbing from it. And so, the message is that end the wars and everybody's life everywhere on the planet will be better. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, the libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle, Foreign Policy Focus on Facebook. That's my private group. And then there's also the Libertarian Union on Facebook. That's a page you could like. Going to be talking about the Syria situation on Monday. Gonna get into a real deep dive with that. Hopefully Will Porter will be joining me on the show for that. And have a good weekend, everyone.